Our story begins at Empire State University, ESU, in the 70s. Peter Parker and Gwen Stacy are being taught at ESU by Professor Miles Warren, a professor of biology. And in their time in his classes, Miles becomes obsessed with Gwen Stacy. In fact, he falls in love with her because Gwen Stacy is killed by the Green Goblin. We all know this, and Miles Warren blames Spider-Man for it because he believes it is Spider-Man's fault. So thus begins his lifelong obsession with cloning Gwen Stacy. And throughout this process, one of his students comes to him with his breakthrough of cloning, and Miles is like, hey, I've got these DNA samples. I want you to clone them, but don't worry, it's just an animal. It's not anything that you should worry about. His student begins the testing and cloning, and he finds out that these are indeed human cells and that Miles is trying to clone humans. So what does Miles do? He ends up ending the student and taking the research and continuing on his own and perfecting these clones. And he makes a clone of Gwen Stacy and Peter Parker. So after Miles does this is when he makes the Jackal persona. He trains his body athletically. He builds some razor sharp claws and builds the costume, and thus the Jackal is born. So Miles Warren, the Jackal, has perfected his cloning process, and we're introduced to another Spider-Man, and this is how he finds out that Spider-Man is Peter Parker through the DNA that he has. So a clone of Spider-Man is sent, and Jackal traps them together, and Gwen Stacy is seemingly come back to life because he's perfected this process, and Spider-Man, Peter Parker, is with MJ at this point. So we have two Spider-Man facing off, and one of them, well, Miles blows up a bomb, and he also cloned himself. So we've got one with the carry-on virus and one that's just a regular genetic copy of him. And they all seemingly die except for one Spider-Man who assumes himself to be the real Spider-Man. So, you know, they get away. Gwen Stacy disappears again because she's a clone. We're back to the status quo of Peter and MJ and the Jackal not being around until we get to the main clone saga in the 90s, from 93 to 96. It's been about 5 years, and Peter has determined that he is indeed the real Peter Parker because of his love for Mary Jane Watson. So they've been together, they've been dating this whole time. And suddenly, another Spider-Man shows up, and this Spider-Man wears a different suit, and he has the same exact powers as Spider-Man, and Spider-Man's like, what's up with that? So it turns out that Pete's clone actually did not perish when he was done away with. He's alive, and he's been living a new life under the name of Ben Reilly, a combination of Peter's Uncle Ben's first name and Aunt May's maiden name, and he develops a superhero called the Scarlet Spider, and he is coming back to New York City to figure out exactly who is real and what his life means. And between finding out that their twins or clones of each other are still alive and they still don't know who the real clone in the original is, the Jackal has showed up again. And not only that, but the original failed clone of Peter Parker, Kaine, has returned as well. And Kaine is not like Spider-Man. He's not stable, but he has regenerative abilities to take care of this, so he's all scarred up. And he also has this thing called the Mark of Kaine, where he essentially just burns the side of someone's face with his sticky spider hands and just leaves a giant hand mark on their face. So Kaine is going around on a rampage, and Ben and Peter don't know what to do because Kaine is powerful. He's stronger than both of them with those regenerative abilities, and he's pretty much unstoppable. Not only that, but another clone of Spider-Man ends up becoming Spider-Side. And Spider-Side, we do not have a figure of him yet, but he is a crazy clone, and he's got some crazy abilities. He looks crazy. He's not a very nice. And the 90s is crazy, so there's a lot of crazy characters in the Clone Saga, like Judas Traveler, and of course Carrion later on. So not every character has been represented in Marvel Legends at this point, but at least we get the main three clones, well, Spider-Man and his two clones, and we have a Jackal. This Clone Saga is not over yet. Meanwhile, all this had been happening, and Peter ended up thinking that he was a clone because Norman Osborn had been manipulating everyone from the very start. He had switched Ben and Peter's DNA samples so it looked like Peter was the clone and Ben was the original, and this was part of his plan. He wanted to just drive Spider-Man crazy and ruin his life, and he used the Jackal, and this was kind of a retcon. He used the Jackal and all these other clones and manipulated Judas Traveler and all these other people to get what he wanted, which was to say, revenge on Spider-Man because Norman is a petty, petty dude. Meanwhile, Kaine is trying to make the real Spider-Man, well, who he thinks is Ben's life, a living hell. So he kills Ben's lover, and that sucks. And then he frames Ben for more killings. And Ben is like, I didn't do this. Who did this? And Kaine just keeps framing him, puts his fingerprints there and all that stuff. And he's kind of going crazy because of his cellular degeneration. And it is not really his fault. He gets better later, but at this point, Kaine is a crazy, mindless killing machine. He's just one purpose, which is to ruin Spider-Man's life, and he thinks that Ben is Spider-Man. So that is exactly what he's trying to do. But because Peter has the same fingerprints as Ben, he is tried as convicted because he's the only registered person with these fingerprints. So he is set up, but Ben Reilly decides to take the fall for that. And while this is happening, this is when Kaine goes on his rampage and ends up killing Grim Hunter and Dr. Octopus. So Kaine is just rampaging, doing more crazy stuff, and all around just not being a great guy. So while this is happening, Kaine is still like, hey, I'm not going to admit to what I did. I tried to frame you, but I'm not going to do it. So Spider-Man fights him, beats him up, webs him up, and he's like, look, I'm going to turn you in unless you tell me exactly what happened. And Kaine reveals finally to Peter that he's the first clone and that he's cellular degenerating and that he did all that stuff, and what he did was the Mark of Kaine, which is kind of like a bastardization of Spider-Man's web slinging, where you can just kind of burn someone's face with a hand mark. So, it's a pretty crazy thing, and that's where we leave Kaine for now. He's kind of repenting for his stuff. He realizes he did bad, and that's just how it is. So Pete, unsure if he is the clone or the real Spider-Man, is still just really flustered about everything. So he decides to retire and just live life with Mary Jane, while Ben takes over as the one and only Spider-Man of New York City, which is where we have this new Spider-Man suit for Ben Reilly, which is his Spider-Man suit. He's not the Scarlet Spider at this point. He is Spider-Man. So Ben is doing his thing in New York City for a while, so any Spider-Man books had Ben in them. So Avengers, team-ups, X-Men books, whatever he crossed over in, it was Ben Reilly at this point in the 90s because Peter Parker had retired. And Ben really proved that he is a real Spider-Man and a real hero with this. He fought Venom, he fought a couple other villains, he's come across Carnage and all that stuff, and he usually came out on top. Ben was really good at being Spider-Man, actually. So Peter really took this to heart and was like, hey, I guess Ben really is Spider-Man and I'm a clone, but that's okay. I love Mary Jane, she loves me, so I'm going to live my life. But at some point, Peter was put in harm's way, and Ben did the only thing a hero would do, and he sacrificed himself. And when that happened, his body slowly dissolved away, as any clones would. And Peter realized that even though Ben was a real Spider-Man, even though Ben was a part of him, he was still the real Spider-Man, and he had to return to doing what he did best, which was being the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man of New York City and making sure that his home city was safe. So rest in peace to Ben for now. And that is where the 90s Clone Saga ended.